The rain had been falling all evening, tapping softly against the windows of the old community hall in Portland. Inside, the room was warm and bright, filled with people who had come for a charity dinner, friends, coworkers, neighbors. Laughter rose and fell. Someone played the piano near the wall, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Daniel Brooks stood near the back, holding a glass he hadn't touched. He told himself he was fine. He had come to show his face, shake hands, leave early. That was the plan. His life ran on plans now. Plans kept things simple. Then the door opened. At first, no one reacted. The rain came in with her, cool air and the smell of wet pavement. A few heads turned. A few smiles followed. But Daniel felt it before he saw her, like a quiet pull in his chest. Emily Carter stepped inside. She wore a deep blue dress that moved gently as she walked, not flashy, not bold. It fit her the way calm fits a lake, natural, steady, honest. Her hair was pinned back, just enough to show her face. She looked older than he remembered, but not in a way that hurt. In a way that felt earned. Daniel froze. He hadn't expected her. He hadn't imagined her in years, not clearly. Memory had softened her edges, blurred her smile. Now she was real again, walking across the room, shaking off her umbrella, thanking someone who held the door. For a moment, the sound in the room faded for him. The piano slowed. The voices blurred. He forgot to breathe. Emily paused near the entrance, scanning the room. She was looking for someone, or maybe something familiar. Her eyes moved calmly, then stopped. They found him. The look on her face changed, not shock, not joy. Something quieter. Something deeper. Like recognition mixed with surprise. Like finding a book you once loved on a shelf you thought was empty. Daniel straightened without thinking. His heart started to race, fast and sharp. He told himself to look away, to pretend he hadn't seen her yet. But his body didn't listen. Across the room, Emily hesitated. Just one step forward, then stillness. That small pause said more than words ever could. It held years of choices, missed calls, unsent messages. People passed between them, laughing, talking, unaware. A server brushed past Daniel, breaking the moment. He blinked, grounded again in the room. Emily moved first. She didn't walk toward him. She turned slightly, greeting someone she knew, smiling politely. But her posture was careful now. Alert. Like someone who had stepped onto thin ice. Daniel watched her from a distance. He noticed how she listened more than she spoke. How her smile appeared and faded quickly. How she held her hands together, calm but tight. This wasn't the Emily he remembered from late-night diners and open highways. This Emily carried herself with quiet strength. The kind that comes from learning how to stand alone. Daniel felt a rush of thoughts. He wondered what she knew. If she was married. If she was happy. If she ever thought of him when things went quiet at night. He took a step forward, then stopped. The past pressed close. He remembered the last conversation they had, gentle, careful, unfinished. No shouting. No blame. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a life they couldn't agree on. Someone called Daniel's name. He nodded, answered briefly, his attention never leaving Emily. The piano shifted to a new song. Softer. Slower. Emily glanced back toward him once more. This time, she didn't look away. They didn't smile. They didn't wave. They simply stood there, connected by the space between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but that quiet moment, the dress, the rain, the pause, was the beginning of something they could not undo. And the night was only just beginning. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about that pause. Even as the room carried on around him, people laughing, glasses clinking, music playing, he felt the pull of her presence like a tether he hadn't realized was still attached. Emily Carter. The name alone made his chest tighten. It had been years, but seeing her again made time feel like it had folded in on itself. He remembered everything about her, the way she used to laugh without holding back, how she would trace her fingers over a coffee cup absent-mindedly when she was nervous, the way her eyes could hold his attention for hours. Back then, he thought they had it all figured out. They had walked through the streets of Portland late at night, shared dreams, made promises that seemed unbreakable. But life had other plans. Jobs, moves, pride, they had drifted apart quietly, without anger, without drama, but with a quiet ache that never fully left. Now, years later, seeing her there in that deep blue dress, Daniel realized just how much he had missed her presence. Not just her beauty, but the calm energy she carried, the way she seemed to know herself fully. She wasn't the same girl he had left behind, and that scared him more than anything. Because he knew part of him had been waiting for this moment, even if he hadn't admitted it. Emily moved through the room gracefully, talking to friends, smiling politely, but her eyes kept flicking back to Daniel. Each time their gazes met, it felt like electricity had surged through him. He didn't know if she felt the same pull, or if it was only his memory and longing speaking. Yet in her stillness, in the subtle way she paused by the dessert table, he saw something he hadn't expected: recognition, hesitation, maybe even a hint of regret. He wanted to approach her, to speak, but a part of him hesitated. They had parted years ago without anger, but the silence between them had always carried weight. Would she still see him the same way? Would she even want to talk? Daniel shook off the thoughts, telling himself he was overthinking. But he wasn't. Every detail, the curve of her smile, the tilt of her head, the way the light hit her hair, pulled him in, and he realized he hadn't felt this way about anyone in years. Emily, on her side, was struggling too. She had prepared herself to move on with her life, to let the past remain a memory. But seeing Daniel again reopened doors she thought she had closed. Memories of laughter, of quiet nights, of conversations that stretched into dawn, all pressed against her mind at once. She had grown, yes, but those years hadn't erased the feelings entirely. She had learned to live without him, but her heart recognized him instantly. They finally found themselves standing on opposite ends of the room during a lull in conversation. Neither spoke at first. Their silence was not awkward, it was heavy, meaningful. Daniel's heart raced as he studied her, noticing the way her hands rested lightly on her purse, the subtle nervous shift of her weight from one foot to another. Emily, meanwhile, noticed his posture, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he watched her without blinking. Neither of them wanted to make the first move. Words seemed unnecessary, yet both felt the need to say something. Daniel remembered how easily they used to talk, how words had flowed between them effortlessly. Now, every potential sentence felt heavy, loaded with unspoken questions. Emily wondered if he had changed, if he had moved on completely, if there was still a place for her in his world. Time seemed to stretch as they lingered there, both aware of each other but unwilling to close the gap. The music shifted again, soft and slow, and Daniel could hear the faint hum of the piano filling the space around them. He remembered the nights they had spent listening to music, sharing dreams in whispers. The memories made him ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. Finally, Emily smiled softly, a small, fleeting gesture, and Daniel's chest tightened. It was a smile that held history, longing, and a quiet question: could this moment mean something? He didn't answer immediately, but the recognition in his eyes spoke louder than words. For a brief instant, it was as if the years apart didn't exist. They were two people standing in a room full of strangers, yet the only thing that mattered was each other. Every glance, every pause, every unspoken thought between them felt alive, electric. Both knew this encounter was dangerous, it could reopen old wounds or offer the chance to write a new story, but neither could step away. And in that silence, heavy with memory and possibility, Daniel realized one thing: seeing Emily again had changed everything. Whatever happened next, they were no longer the people they had been. Time had moved on, and so had they, but somehow, fate had brought them back together, just long enough to remind them of what they had lost, and perhaps, what they could still find. The room had thinned out by the time Daniel noticed her standing near the window. Most of the guests had drifted to the bar or moved outside to feel the rain on their faces. The piano now played something soft, almost like it was setting the stage for the quiet between them. Daniel felt a tug in his chest and moved closer, careful not to startle her. Emily looked out at the rain, her hands lightly resting on the window frame. Her mind was a storm of its own, years of distance, memories of conversations and laughter, questions she had never asked. She wasn't looking at him yet, but she could feel him near. There was a pull, quiet but undeniable, like two magnets that had been apart for too long. Daniel cleared his throat, the sound breaking the tension. "This dress," he said, his voice low, steady. He didn't mean it as a compliment in the shallow sense. It wasn't about her appearance alone. It was the way she carried herself, the calm confidence, the quiet grace. "It suits you." Emily turned slightly, caught off guard. She didn't laugh, she didn't blush. She simply nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I almost didn't wear it," she admitted, her voice careful but honest. There was no pretense in her tone, only truth. Daniel realized that, after all these years, honesty was the bridge they had been missing. They started to talk. Slowly at first, carefully. About their lives, their jobs, the cities they had lived in. Nothing heavy, nothing dramatic. Just words meant to fill the silence that had stretched between them for so long. And yet, every pause held meaning. Every glance held a memory. They laughed softly over small details, exchanged quick smiles, and sometimes just stood in silence, listening to the rain tapping against the glass. Daniel noticed things about her he hadn't before, the subtle way she shifted her weight when she was nervous, the small crease between her brows when she concentrated, the way her eyes sparkled when she remembered something funny. Emily noticed him too, the quiet steadiness he had gained over the years, the way he seemed taller, more grounded, but somehow still carried a sadness she remembered from long ago. Neither of them wanted to rush the moment. They had learned patience the hard way. Emily had learned to let go of people who couldn't stay. Daniel had learned that success didn't always equal happiness. Yet standing there, words flowing and stopping, glances lingering, it was clear neither had fully moved on. "I didn't think I'd see you here," Daniel said finally, breaking a silence that had stretched longer than either of them realized. "Not after all this time." Emily's eyes softened. "Sometimes, life has a way of showing up when you least expect it," she said. Her words weren't meant to reopen old wounds, they were a gentle acknowledgement that fate had brought them together again, if only for this moment. Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, even as his heart tightened. He had carried regrets for years, thoughts of what might have been, of choices made in pride and haste. Now, standing here, listening to her voice, he realized that regret could be shared, softened, maybe even turned into something new. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, and the evening shadows stretched across the room. They continued talking, memories surfacing alongside new stories, laughter mingling with quiet reflection. There was no rush, no urgency, just the two of them in a moment suspended between the past and what could come next. Emily finally admitted something she had kept to herself, that the distance had been harder than she ever let anyone see. Daniel nodded, understanding more than words could express. He admitted his own struggles, the times he had missed her, the nights he had wondered if she remembered them too. Their confessions weren't dramatic, they were simple, true, and intimate in the way only old friends, or old lovers, could be. Time seemed to slip away. The room faded around them. The music, the chatter, the lights, they all became background to the quiet intensity between them. Each sentence, each smile, each pause was like turning a page in a story that had never really ended. And then came the hardest part. Emily mentioned she would be leaving town again soon. Daniel felt that familiar fear, the fear of letting go too soon, of missing a chance that had returned after years. But this time, there was no rush, no anger, no pride. Just choices. They stood by the window, rain slowing, hearts stirring. Neither knew what would happen next, but both felt the undeniable truth, some moments couldn't be ignored. And some meetings, after years apart, were not coincidences, they were opportunities waiting to be taken. The night was quiet now. Most guests had left, the chatter had faded, and only the soft hum of the piano lingered in the background. Daniel and Emily stood near the door, the rain outside forming tiny patterns on the glass. Everything around them seemed distant, as if the world had paused to give them a moment alone. Emily turned to face him fully. Her eyes held a calm intensity, the kind that made Daniel forget the careful lines he always tried to draw around his heart. She spoke softly, but with a certainty that made her words land with weight. "Some people come back into our lives to remind us who we were," she said. "Others come back to show us who we can still become." Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. Her voice carried the honesty of someone who had lived through the years apart, learned lessons, and still carried hope. He searched her face, trying to find the answers to questions he hadn't dared to ask. Questions about regret, about what could have been, about the possibility that they weren't finished. "And sometimes," he replied, his voice low, careful, "they come back because the story isn't finished." His words surprised him, they weren't rehearsed. They weren't polished. They were true. He had felt it the moment he saw her, had felt it in the quiet pauses, in the laughter, in the way their memories intertwined with the present. Emily studied him for a long moment. She didn't speak, but her expression softened. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. There was no rush, no need to force anything. Both of them understood that whatever came next had to be chosen, not demanded by circumstance or time. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, each drop catching the light like tiny diamonds. Daniel noticed it, but he also noticed how steady Emily stood, how her presence filled the doorway without needing to move. There was something grounding about her now, something that made the chaotic world outside seem less important. He realized that this wasn't about rushing into old patterns or trying to reclaim what they had lost. It was about being present, about seeing each other fully after years apart. Their past had shaped them, but it didn't have to define what came next. He felt a rare clarity, the kind that only appears when honesty and longing meet in the quiet space between two people. Emily took a step closer, but not into his arms. She stood in the moment, letting it exist without forcing it. Daniel's heart thudded in response, faster now, aware of every subtle movement. He wanted to speak, to bridge the gap, but he knew that some things couldn't be rushed. They had learned patience in the years apart. They had learned that timing mattered. "I have to leave again soon," Emily said, breaking the silence with a truth neither of them could ignore. It was simple, factual, but it carried a weight. Daniel nodded, understanding instantly. He had expected this. He had feared it. But the acknowledgement didn't hurt as much as he thought it would. Somehow, it made the choice clearer. Daniel reached out lightly, just close enough to show his presence, not to claim it. Emily's eyes met his, and in that gaze, they shared something without words, recognition, understanding, and the willingness to step into what could be. No promises. No demands. Just the courage to be honest with themselves. She stepped away from the window, and he followed, not with haste, but with intention. Their steps were quiet, measured, like the rhythm of a story that was finally allowed to unfold. The night outside reflected in the glass, the soft light painting them in shades of possibility. Neither of them rushed to define what this meant. There were no declarations, no dramatic gestures. Just presence, honesty, and the quiet acknowledgement that some moments are rare because they force people to see what truly matters. They had been given a second chance, not to erase the past, but to step forward with clarity and intention. Emily finally opened the door. The cool air from the rain wrapped around them. She paused, looked back, and smiled gently, a smile full of history and hope. Daniel realized that night that love didn't always return loudly or dramatically. Sometimes, it returned softly, quietly, but with a force that changed everything. As she walked away, wearing that deep blue dress, Daniel stayed still for a moment, letting the night sink in. The rain had slowed, the world had settled, and yet everything inside him had shifted. What had happened between them that evening didn't need a grand gesture to matter. It mattered because it was real, because it was honest, and because it gave them both a chance to see what was possible. That night changed them forever, not because they solved everything, not because they had a perfect ending. It changed them because they faced the truth of their feelings, because they allowed themselves to connect again, and because they understood that sometimes, the quiet moments hold the power to rewrite the heart. And in that understanding, Daniel knew one thing clearly: whatever came next, they had found each other again, and for the first time in years, that was enough.